What if the single greatest catastrophe of the ancient world was nothing more than a phantom limb, an ache for a wisdom we never truly lost? What if the flames that supposedly consumed the Library of Alexandria were quietly extinguished, and its vast collections of scrolls and codices were secretly transported to safety, preserved in hidden vaults to await a more enlightened age? The story of the library's destruction is a narrative we have accepted, a tragedy that marks the transition from the luminous mind of antiquity to a long, intellectual twilight. But what if that story is merely a veil, a clever ruse to protect the most precious repository of knowledge ever assembled from the relentless march of empires and ideologies? Tonight on Slumber Expeditions, we will explore the grandeur of the library, sift through the conflicting historical accounts of its demise, and follow a compelling theory that its vast knowledge was secretly saved. We will trace a hidden journey from Alexandria's halls to distant sanctuaries, investigating how this rescued wisdom may have secretly fueled the Renaissance and shaped our modern world. So, before you settle in, if you're finding comfort in these explorations of lost knowledge, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. But only if you genuinely like what we do here. We would also love to hear from you in the comments below. Tell us where you're listening from and what time it is there. It's always fascinating to connect with a global community of curious minds who share this fascination with the echoes of ancient worlds. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's speculative journey together. You are standing on the Heptastadion, the great causeway that connects the mainland of Egypt to the island of Pharos, in the 3rd century before the Common Era. The Mediterranean sun is warm on your skin, and a steady breeze carries the scent of salt and sea. Before you, stretching in a magnificent grid of white marble and limestone, is the city of Alexandria, a testament to human ambition. To your left, in the royal quarter, your gaze is drawn to a complex of grand buildings nestled among palaces and gardens. This is the Bruchaeon, and within it lies the heart of the city's purpose, the Royal Library and the Mouseion. You are not here as a merchant or a soldier, but as a scholar, one of the many drawn from across the known world to this citadel of knowledge. Your sandals whisper against the stone as you walk toward it, a sense of reverence building with each step. You pass through a colonnaded entrance into a courtyard where the sounds of the city fade, replaced by the quiet murmur of fountains and the rustle of papyrus. You enter the main hall of the library, and the air changes. It is cooler, drier, carrying the distinct, sweet smell of papyrus scrolls and the earthy tang of ink. Light slants in from high windows, illuminating countless wooden shelves and cabinets that stretch into the dimness. Each shelf is neatly packed with cylindrical cases, the capsa, and from each dangles a small tag, a syllabus, identifying the author and work within. The scale is almost incomprehensible. It is said the goal here is to possess a copy of every book in the world. Royal officials board every ship that docks in the harbor, confiscating scrolls to be copied by an army of scribes. The copies are returned, the originals added to this ever-growing collection. This is not merely a storage house. It is a living, breathing organism dedicated to the accumulation of human understanding. Around you, scholars move with quiet purpose. Some sit at lecterns, slowly unrolling texts, their lips moving silently as they absorb the words of a Babylonian astronomer or a Greek mathematician. Others converse in hushed, intense tones in the courtyards, debating a point of philosophy or a new medical theory. You see a man studying a complex diagram of the heavens. This could be Aristarchus of Samos, who is beginning to formulate the heretical idea that the earth revolves around the sun. In another corner, Eratosthenes, the chief librarian, is comparing notes from two different cities in Egypt, on the verge of calculating the entire circumference of the planet with stunning accuracy. The atmosphere is one of focused calm, a sanctuary where the greatest minds are free to ask the biggest questions, supported by the boundless resources of the Ptolemaic kings. The city outside is a mirror to this intellectual ambition. At the tip of Pharos, the great lighthouse, one of the seven wonders, stands sentinel. Its polished bronze mirrors reflect a fire that can be seen for miles, a literal beacon of enlightenment guiding travelers to this shore. The lighthouse and the library are twin symbols of Alexandria's identity, one guiding ships to a safe harbor, the other guiding minds toward truth. The city itself is a vibrant, cosmopolitan crossroads where Egyptians, Greeks, Jews, Persians, and Indians mingle. In the streets, the languages of the world are spoken, and in the marketplaces, goods and ideas are traded with equal fervor. You feel it in the air, a sense of possibility, a feeling that here, at the edge of the known world, humanity is on the cusp of unlocking the universe's deepest secrets. The knowledge contained within these walls feels eternal, as solid and enduring as the marble upon which the city is built. This was not a city that had grown organically from the soil, like Athens or Thebes, but one that was drawn upon a blank slate of sand and coastline by the ambitious hand of Alexander the Great himself. Its streets were laid out in a perfect grid, a rational pattern imposed upon the chaotic landscape. The vision of the first Ptolemy, Ptolemy Isoter, was for a living, breathing center of learning, a Mausion. It was to be a university, a research institute, and a library all in one. The goal was audacious, and for a time, in this shining city by the sea, it seemed entirely within reach. The daily life within the library was one of meticulous order and profound discovery. Imagine the scriptorium, a long, well-lit room where dozens of scribes worked. The only sounds were the scratching of reed pens on papyrus, the gentle clatter of clay ink pots, and the soft, rhythmic breathing of men intent on their work. A newly arrived scroll, perhaps from a merchant ship that had sailed from the Indus Valley, would be handled with extreme care. First, it would be examined by a curator for damage or pests. Then, it would be given to a translator if needed, before being passed to a scribe for copying. The original would be catalogued and shelved, while the copy might be sent back to its point of origin or placed in the secondary library at the Serapeum. This process happened hundreds of times a year, relentless, systematic ingestion of the world's knowledge. The librarians developed sophisticated systems of organization, creating the first library catalog, the Pinox, which listed authors and their works across numerous scrolls, a monumental work of bibliography that itself was a testament to the scale of the collection. It was a hive of intellectual activity, but a quiet, reverent hive, where the accumulation of facts was seen as a sacred duty to the muses of history, science, and art. The scholars who worked here were provided with a stipend, rooms, and access to the royal gardens, freed from worldly concerns so that their minds could roam the farthest reaches of geometry, astronomy, and poetry. They debated in shaded walkways, tested theories in laboratories, and dissected human cadavers in the name of medical progress, pushing boundaries in ways that would not be seen again for over 1,000 years. The library was not just a building, it was an ecosystem of the mind, a perfect environment for genius to flourish, protected and nurtured by the power and wealth of a kingdom that believed its legacy would be written not in conquests, but in scrolls. The traditional narrative of the library's destruction is a simple and heartbreaking one, a single, catastrophic fire, a moment of wanton violence that erased centuries of accumulated wisdom in a single night. This image is powerful, but the historical reality is far more complex, a slow and painful decline marked by several incidents of damage and loss, rather than one definitive conflagration. The library, like knowledge itself, was a fragile entity, vulnerable to the political upheavals, religious fervor, and simple neglect that have characterized much of human history. To understand the possibility of its salvation, we must first trace the shadows of its alleged demises, each event adding another layer of obscurity to its ultimate fate. The first major blow is often attributed to Julius Caesar during the Alexandrian War of 48 to 47 BCE. Caesar, besieged in the royal palace quarter by the forces of Ptolemy XIII, found his fleet outmaneuvered in the harbor. In a tactical decision born of desperation, he ordered his men to set fire to the Egyptian ships. The ancient historians, such as Plutarch and Dio Cassius, report that the fire spread from the docks into the city, and that it consumed a large number of books stored in warehouses near the shore, which were possibly overflow from the great library itself. Caesar himself, in his own account, makes no mention of this, a telling omission. The consensus among many scholars is that while a significant number of scrolls were lost in this event, it likely did not destroy the main library building, which was part of the palace complex and may have been spared the worst of the flames. This was a grave wound, but not a mortal one. In the centuries that followed, Alexandria continued to be a center of learning, though its intellectual character began to change. The rise of the Roman Empire saw the city's status diminish from a proud capital to a provincial jewel, often restive under Roman rule. More significantly, the spiritual landscape was shifting. The philosophical schools of Greece, which had nourished the library scholars, were increasingly challenged by new, fervent religious movements, particularly Christianity. The Mouseion, with its pagan associations and its dedication to secular knowledge, became a target for zealous factions who saw its contents as heretical or superfluous. The next shadow fell in the late 4th century CE. Theophilus, the Patriarch of Alexandria, a powerful and militant Christian leader, embarked on a campaign to destroy pagan institutions in the city. In 391 CE, he received permission from the Emperor Theodosius I to demolish the Serapeum, the magnificent temple of the god Serapis. The Serapeum was not just a temple, it was a daughter library, a satellite of the Great Library, reputed to hold a significant portion of the collection, perhaps even the main collection if it had been moved for safekeeping. The accounts describe the temple's destruction by a Christian mob, and it is almost certain that any literary treasures housed within were lost or scattered. This event signals the end of the Mouseion as a state-supported institution. The scholars were dispersed, the funding ceased, and the Great Library, as a functioning body, effectively ceased to exist. The final, symbolic death knell is often placed in the mid-7th century with the Arab conquest of Alexandria in 642 CE. A later legend, written centuries after the fact, claims that the Caliph Omar, when asked what to do with the books in the city's libraries, reportedly declared that if the books contained the same knowledge as the Quran, they were superfluous, and if they contradicted it, they were heretical. In either case, he decreed they should be destroyed. The story goes that the scrolls were used as fuel to heat the city's public baths, and that it took 6 months to burn them all. However, most modern historians dismiss this tale as a later fabrication, a piece of anti-Muslim propaganda created during the Crusades. By the time of the Arab conquest, the Great Library of the Ptolemies was almost certainly already a ghost, its halls long silent, its vast collection already diminished to near nothingness by centuries of decay, theft, and targeted destruction. The legend of Omar's fire is a poetic, tragic end, but it is likely just that, a legend. This fragmented history of loss reveals a crucial point. The destruction was not a single event, but a process. It was a slow bleeding out over 5 centuries. This timeline is critical, for it opens a window of possibility. If the final, complete annihilation was not instantaneous, then there was time. Time for foresight. Time for those who understood the value of what was housed within those walls to act. The gradual nature of the decline suggests that the complete and utter loss of the library's holdings was not an inevitability, but rather the result of a series of failures to protect it. But what if, at some point in this long twilight, that failure was averted? What if, seeing the storm clouds gathering on the horizon, the last true guardians of knowledge decided to fight back not with swords, but with secrecy? The period of decline was not a straight line into darkness. There were moments of revival, brief respites when the value of the library was recognized anew. Certain Roman emperors, like Hadrian, who had a deep love for Greek culture, may have contributed to its restoration. But these were fleeting gestures against the tide of history. The real tragedy was one of neglect. As the Roman Empire fractured and crumbled, the funding for the Mouseion dried up. The scribes stopped their copying, the scholars drifted away to more secure positions, and the great reading halls fell silent. Papyrus, for all its virtues, is in fragile medium. Without constant care, it succumbs to moisture, to insects, to the simple, relentless pressure of time. Scrolls that were not actively used and copied would have slowly deteriorated in their cases, the ink fading, the material becoming brittle. This slow decay, this quiet forgetting, may have claimed more of the library's holdings than any fire. It is a poignant image, not a violent end, but a gentle slipping away, a slow forgetting of the light that had once burned so brightly. The walls remained, but the soul of the place was leaching away year by year, scroll by scroll. This very gradualness, however, is what makes the theory of salvation so compelling. It was not a sudden crisis that demanded a panicked response, but a long, slow emergency that allowed for a deliberate, careful, and secretive plan to be conceived and executed over generations. The theory that the Library of Alexandria was saved, not lost, rests on a foundation of compelling, if circumstantial, evidence and a profound understanding of human nature. It posits that the librarians and scholars of the Mouseion, witnessing the increasing political instability and the rising tide of religious intolerance, recognize the existential threat to their life's work. Rather than allow centuries of human achievement to be wiped away by zealots or lost to neglect, they orchestrated a clandestine, multi-generational operation to relocate the core of the collection to places of safety. This was not a frantic last-minute rescue, but a deliberate, patient, and brilliantly executed strategy of preservation. The first and most logical candidates for this guardianship are the scholars of the Mouseion themselves. These were not reclusive bookworms. They were the leading intellectuals of their age, with connections across the Mediterranean world. They would have had ample warning of the shifting political winds. The Roman annexation of Egypt, the gradual erosion of their royal patronage, and the early clashes between pagan, Jewish, and Christian factions in Alexandria's streets would have served as a clear alarm. It is conceivable that a consensus emerged among the chief librarians over successive generations. The collection was too precious to remain in one vulnerable location. The dispersal began not as a reaction to a crisis, but as a proactive measure of insurance. Where could such a vast quantity of scrolls be taken? The most promising destinations would have been other major centers of learning that still thrived, albeit far from the volatile environment of Roman Egypt. The theory points to several key sanctuaries. To the east lay the Persian Empire, and in particular the magnificent Academy of Gondeshapur. This city became a renowned center of knowledge, welcoming Greek philosophers and Nestorian Christians fleeing Byzantine persecution. It is perfectly plausible that Alexandrian scholars, seeking a patron who valued their work, arranged for the transfer of significant portions of the library, especially scientific and medical texts, to Gondeshapur, where they would later be translated into Persian and Syriac, preserving them for posterity. To the west, other safe havens beckoned. The city of Constantinople, the new capital of the Roman Empire, was a natural destination. While the Eastern Empire had its own troubles, it maintained a tradition of classical learning for centuries. Emperors and wealthy patrons would have paid a fortune for original works from Alexandria. Secret agreements could have been made to transport scrolls by sea, hidden among cargo, to enrich the nascent libraries of Constantinople. Furthermore, remote monastic communities present a tantalizing possibility. The desert monasteries of Egypt, like those of the Nitrian desert, became famous for their scriptoria and libraries. What if Alexandrian scholars, perhaps those sympathetic to the new Christian intellectualism, entrusted certain theological or philosophical texts to these isolated brotherhoods, where they could be copied and preserved away from the political turmoil of the cities? The logistics of such an operation, while daunting, were not impossible. Alexandria was a port city, and the movement of goods was its lifeblood. Scrolls could be discreetly packed in waterproof chests and loaded onto trusted merchant vessels bound for various destinations. The overland routes, though perilous, were well established. The key to the theory's plausibility is that the transfer would not have been a single, massive exodus, but a slow, steady trickle over decades, even centuries. A few dozen scrolls with each shipment, a secret agreement with a caravan master here, a sympathetic ship captain there. The very gradualness of the library's historical decline provided the perfect cover for its clandestine evacuation. The empty shelves and silent holes that later visitors remarked upon were not the result of a great fire, but of a great and silent migration. This theory also helps to explain one of the most perplexing phenomena in intellectual history, the European Renaissance. The standard explanation is that the fall of Constantinople in 1453 caused a flood of Greek scholars and classical texts into Italy, sparking a rebirth of learning. But what if those texts were not merely the remnants that had survived in Constantinople? What if they were part of a much larger, carefully preserved corpus that had originated in Alexandria? The sudden reemergence of advanced ideas in astronomy, geometry, and medicine in the Renaissance seems less like a rediscovery and more like a release of knowledge that had been held in trust. The Guardian's Gambit, therefore, is not just a story about saving books. It is a theory that reframes the entire narrative of Western intellectual history, suggesting that the light of antiquity was never fully extinguished, but was merely hidden, waiting for a dawn when the world would be ready to see it again. Imagine the final head librarian, a man whose name is lost to history, looking out over the dwindling collection. He has seen the mobs in the streets, heard the rhetoric of the new powerful bishops, and watched the imperial subsidies cease. He knows the end is near. But he is not a warrior. He is a preserver. He calls together his most trusted associates, the head curator, the head scribe, a few senior scholars. In a private room, by lamplight, they make a pact. They will not let this happen. They will not be the generation that allows this light to go out. They begin to identify the most critical texts, the unique copies, the foundational works of science and philosophy, the scrolls that cannot be replaced. They reach out through their scholarly networks, making discreet inquiries. A message is sent to a contact in Gondeshapur, another to a fellow scholar now at a monastery in the desert. A plan is formed. It will take years, perhaps the rest of their lives. They will never see its completion, but they will die knowing they have set in motion a process to save the soul of the ancient world. This quiet, heroic decision, made not for glory but for duty to knowledge itself, is the heart of the Guardian's Gambit. It is a story of profound courage, the kind that does not echo on the battlefield, but whispers through the corridors of time in the pages of every saved book. As we conclude this part of our journey into the fate of the Great Library, we'd like to extend a special thank you for listening. If you're finding comfort in these explorations of lost knowledge, please consider liking this video and subscribing to Slumber Expeditions. We would also love to hear from you in the comments below. Tell us where you're listening from and what time it is there. It's always fascinating to connect with our global community of curious minds. You can also share which part of the story has captivated you the most so far. It would be wonderful to start a conversation around it. Now, let the mystery of what we've uncovered so far settle in your mind as we prepare to continue our exploration. As the long twilight of the Roman Empire deepened, and the certainty of the classical world gave way to the fervent uncertainties of new faiths, the guardians of the Great Library faced a dilemma of existential proportions. The great institutions of learning, once supported by the might of emperors and kings, were now viewed with suspicion, their secular knowledge seen as a rival to revealed truth. It was in this atmosphere of growing peril that the most clandestine chapter of the library's story may have begun. The theory of salvation suggests that the most precious and vulnerable texts, those containing the advanced mathematics, the heliocentric astronomy, the materialist philosophies that challenged emerging orthodoxies, were not destined for other great cities, but for the most isolated places on Earth. The knowledge of Alexandria, born in a vibrant, cosmopolitan port, would seek refuge in the profound silence of the desert. Imagine the meticulous planning required for such an endeavor. It would not be a single, dramatic caravan, but a slow, patient trickle over generations. A trusted scholar, perhaps a man who had grown disillusioned with the theological squabbles of the city, would make arrangements with a caravan master known for discretion. The payment would not be in coin alone, but in the form of a promise, the safeguarding of a treasure whose value was beyond price. The chosen scrolls would be carefully selected from the innermost collections, those unique works for which no copy existed elsewhere. They would be treated with preservative oils, wrapped in linen, and sealed within cylindrical clay cases or sturdy wooden chests, their contents unknown to the transporters. These chests would be loaded among sacks of grain and amphorae of wine, their true identity a secret known only to a few. The journey would be long and perilous, following ancient trade routes deep into the deserts of Egypt, towards the remote wadis where communities of monks had established their sanctuaries. Your mind can follow this journey now, into the stillness of the desert night. The air is sharp and cold, the sky an endless, black dome ablaze with stars. The only sounds are the soft crunch of sand underfoot, the snort of a camel, and the whisper of the wind. The destination is a place like the Wadi al-Matron, the Nitrian desert. Here, rising from the sands like miracles of faith, were the great Coptic monasteries, St. Macarius, St. Bashoui. These were not simple hermitages. They were formidable complexes with high walls, built to withstand both the elements and bandit raids. They were spiritual fortresses, and within their walls, a different kind of warfare was waged, a battle against forgetfulness. The monks who welcomed these strange cargoes were men of intense discipline. Their lives were ordered around prayer and manual labor, but central to their vocation was the work of the scriptorium, the copying of sacred texts. They understood that the word, whether divine or human, was sacred and must be preserved. Within the thick, mud brick walls of a monastery scriptorium, a remarkable synthesis would have taken place. The air would be heavy with the smell of ink, parchment, and beeswax. By the light of a single oil lamp, a monk would unroll a text that had not been read in a century. It might be the Samites of Archimedes, detailing his ingenious sand reckoner to count the grains of the universe, or on the sizes and distances of Aristarchus, laying out the first heliocentric model. To this monk, these were not heretical tracts, but magnificent expressions of a God-given human reason. The intricate geometry was a glimpse into the mind of a divine geometer. The ordered cosmos described by the astronomers was a testament to a creator's law. The act of copying was not merely mechanical, it was an act of contemplation. As the monk's reed pen carefully traced the Greek letters onto fresh, durable parchment, creating a new codex to be shelved in the monastery library, he was performing a sacred duty. He was ensuring that this spark of reason, this product of a different age and a different faith, would not be extinguished. This hidden network of preservation was not confined to Egypt. The tendrils of this effort may have stretched across the Mediterranean. In the far west, on the wild, windswept coasts of Ireland, other monastic communities were establishing their own reputations for scholarship and magnificent illuminated manuscripts. Places like Skellig Michael, a stark pinnacle of rock rising from the Atlantic, or the Abbey of Kells, became centers of learning in a Europe darkening into chaos. While a direct, documented link is elusive, the pathways of pilgrimage and trade were well established. Could it be that copies of texts, having first found safety in the Egyptian desert, were carried by pious travelers to these ultimate Western outposts? The intricate, mathematical precision of Celtic knotwork, an art form that seems to echo geometric principles, and the profound scholarly knowledge possessed by figures like Street Columba hint at an exposure to a stream of classical learning that had somehow survived the collapse of the Roman world. These remote, rain-lashed monasteries, insulated from the continent's turmoil, would have been the perfect final sanctuary, a backup of a backup, ensuring that even if catastrophe struck in the east, the flame would be kept alive in the west. The image of the candle in the desert is thus the central metaphor for this phase of the salvation. These monasteries were not powerhouses of innovation like Alexandria or Baghdad. They were quiet, patient guardians. Their contribution was not to advance the knowledge, but to preserve it with unwavering fidelity. They were the vital, missing link in the chain of knowledge, the guardians who held the line during the long centuries of transition. They kept the flame of rational inquiry alive, not by shouting it from the rooftops, but by tending to it in silence, ensuring that when the world was finally ready to listen again, the whispers of Euclid, the musings of Archimedes, and the star charts of Hipparchus would still be there, patiently waiting in the cool, dark silence of their libraries. The desert, a place of emptiness to the outside eye, became a vessel brimming with the most profound thoughts of antiquity. If the monasteries of the West represented a strategy of silent, patient preservation, the journey of knowledge to the East was one of dynamic transformation. While Europe entered a period of consolidation and introspection, the Persian Empire, under the Sasanian dynasty, was cultivating an ethos of intellectual cosmopolitanism. It is here, in the ancient city of Gondeshapur, that the story of the library's salvation shifts from a desperate act of hiding to a brilliant strategy of reinvigoration. The theory posits that a significant portion of the library's scientific and philosophical corpus was deliberately transferred to this eastern cradle, where it would not just survive, but become the foundational text for a new golden age. The journey east would have been no less perilous than the journey into the desert, but it followed a different logic. Instead of seeking isolation, the scholars of Alexandria would have been seeking a new patron. The Sasanian kings, particularly Khosrow I Anushirvan, known as the Immortal Soul, were legendary for their patronage of learning. Their court was a haven for intellectuals persecuted elsewhere. When the Byzantine Emperor Justinian closed the Platonic Academy in Athens in 529 CE, it was to Khosrow's court that the last 7 Neoplatonic philosophers journeyed, finding a welcome they could no longer find in the Christian Roman Empire. Gondeshapur was developed into a magnificent academy featuring a university, an observatory, a library, and the world's first known teaching hospital. It was a deliberate creation, a new Alexandria far from the troubled waters of the Mediterranean. The city became a true melting pot of knowledge. Here, the Greek tradition brought by the Athenian philosophers met the ancient medical knowledge of Persia and India. Syriac-speaking Nestorian Christians, who had also faced persecution for their theological views, were among the leading scholars and translators. The environment was one of synthesis and debate, not dogmatic adherence. This was precisely the kind of vibrant, supportive environment that would have appealed to the last guardians of the Malsion. A secret embassy, a series of coded messages, could have resulted in a formal agreement. The Ptolemies were gone, but the Sasanians were willing to become the new sponsors of the great intellectual project. The transfer of scrolls would have been a state-sponsored affair, conducted with the efficiency and security of an imperial postal service, a far cry from the clandestine desert caravans. Upon arrival in Gondeshapur, the Alexandrian texts would have entered a new life cycle. The first and most crucial step was translation. Teams of scholars, fluent in Greek and Syriac, would have set to work translating the vast corpus. This was not a simple, word-for-word transcription. It was an act of deep intellectual engagement. The translators had to grapple with complex concepts, often creating new terms in Syriac to capture the precise meaning of Greek philosophical and scientific vocabulary. This process itself ensured the knowledge was not just copied, but understood, digested, and integrated into a new intellectual framework. The library at Gondeshapur would have hummed with this activity, an echo of the great scriptorium of Alexandria, but now with a polyglot chorus of Greek, Syriac, and Persian. This foundation laid at Gondeshapur directly enabled the spectacular flourishing of the Islamic Golden Age. When the Abbasid Caliphate rose to power and established Baghdad as its capital, the Caliph al-Mansur founded the Beit al-Hikmah, the House of Wisdom, in the 8th century. This institution was the direct heir to the Gondeshapur Academy. The translation project expanded exponentially, now rendering the texts from Greek and Syriac into Arabic, the new lingua franca of a vast empire. The scholars of the House of Wisdom, figures like the mathematician al-Khwarizmi, who systematized algebra, the physician al-Rayzi, who wrote groundbreaking encyclopedias of medicine, and the polymath Ibn Sina, Avicenna, whose canon of medicine became a standard text in Europe for centuries, were not working in isolation. They were standing on the shoulders of giants, and they had access to a library that was, in essence, the Library of Alexandria reborn and enriched. The evidence for this is not merely circumstantial, it is etched into the very language of modern science. The words we use, algebra, algorithm, alkali, zenith, alchemy, are Arabic loanwords, a permanent testament to the channel through which this knowledge flowed. The star names in our night sky, Aldebaran, Altair, Betelgeuse, speak of the sophisticated Arabic astronomical catalogues that were built upon the Greek foundation. The sheer volume and advanced nature of the scientific output from the Islamic world between the 9th and 13th centuries is inexplicable if they were working from the same sparse, fragmented texts that were available in contemporary Europe. Their advancements in optics, surgery, chemistry, and engineering suggest access to a complete and sophisticated curriculum, the very curriculum that had been developed and collected in Alexandria. The journey to the east, therefore, was not an escape into obscurity. It was a strategic migration to a more fertile environment. The library had not been saved merely to be stored. It had been saved to bear fruit. The Guardians' Gambit had succeeded beyond their wildest dreams, ensuring that the light of antiquity would not just flicker in remote deserts, but would blaze forth anew, illuminating a golden age that would, in time, relight the lamps of the West. For centuries, the knowledge preserved and advanced in the Islamic world existed as a parallel universe to a Latin Christendom that was largely unaware of its scope and sophistication. Europe, fragmented and introspective after the collapse of the Roman Empire, was focused on theological coherence and feudal survival. The great river of classical learning, which had flowed so powerfully through Alexandria and now ran deep and strong through Baghdad and Cordoba, seemed to have been diverted entirely away from the European continent. Yet, the geography of faith and power ensured that contact was inevitable. The return of this knowledge was not a single event, but a gradual, then accelerating, process of rediscovery, a silent return that would culminate in the explosion of creativity we call the Renaissance. The primary bridge for this return was the Iberian Peninsula, known as Al-Andalus under Muslim rule. For centuries, cities like Cordoba, Toledo, and Seville were among the most advanced in the world, their libraries housing hundreds of thousands of volumes, while the largest libraries in Christian Europe held mere hundreds. The slow, centuries-long campaign of the Reconquista, the Christian reconquest of Spain, did not just capture territory, it captured knowledge. When Toledo fell to Alfonso VI of Castile in 1085, the Christian conquerors found a city that was a living library of Arabic science. Rather than destroy this treasure, Archbishop Raymond of Toledo established a formal translation bureau. This was the pivotal moment. Scholars were recruited from across Europe, men like Gerard of Cremona, who was so dismayed by the poverty of Latin learning that he dedicated his life to translating the Arabic texts he found in Toledo. The translation effort in Toledo was a monumental, collaborative enterprise. It involved a complex, multi-stage process. A Jewish scholar, fluent in Arabic and Hebrew, would read the Arabic text aloud. A Mozarabic Christian, a Christian living under Muslim rule, fluent in Hebrew and the local Romance language, would translate it orally. Finally, a Latin scholar would render the Romance translation into formal Latin. Through this painstaking work, the complete works of Aristotle, now filtered through the commentaries of Avicenna and Averroes, entered the European mainstream. So too did Ptolemy's Almagest, a name derived from the Arabic Almagisti, Euclid's Elements, and the medical works of Galen and Al-Razi. This was not a trickle, it was a floodgate opening. The intellectual landscape of Europe was fundamentally and irrevocably altered. The scholastic philosophers of the universities like Thomas Aquinas now grappled with Aristotle, who was a logician and a natural scientist, not just a moral philosopher, and this encounter sparked an intellectual revolution. Simultaneously, another conduit was active in the multicultural kingdom of Sicily. Conquered by Arab armies, then by Norman knights, the island became a unique crucible where Latin, Greek, and Arabic cultures coexisted and cross-pollinated. The court of the Holy Roman Emperor Frederick II, who ruled from Palermo in the early 13th century, was a spectacle of intellectual curiosity. Frederick, Stupor Mundi, the wonder of the world, spoke 6 languages, including Arabic. He engaged in diplomatic correspondence with Muslim scholars, asking intricate philosophical and scientific questions. He kept a menagerie of exotic animals and conducted experiments on digestion, forbidding his hunters to feed their falcons so he could study the bird's anatomy. Under his patronage, texts flowed directly from the Arabic world into Latin. Sicily became a backdoor through which the practical, applied knowledge of the Islamic world, its mathematics, its astronomy, its engineering, entered the European mind. The final, dramatic accelerator of this return was the fall of Constantinople to the Ottoman Turks in 1453. This event sent a wave of Greek-speaking scholars fleeing to Italy, carrying with them precious manuscripts of classical texts. But our theory reframes this event. It was not the source of the Renaissance, but the catalyst that supercharged it. The scholars from Byzantium brought with them the original Greek versions of Plato, Homer, and the tragedians. This allowed European humanists to compare the original Greek texts with the Latin versions they had received via the Arabic translations. They discovered nuances and ideas that had been lost in translation. This direct reconnection with a pure source of Greek thought, combined with a massive body of scientific and philosophical knowledge that had already been assimilated from the Islamic world over the preceding 3 centuries, created a critical mass of intellectual energy. This energy found its perfect tool in the invention of the printing press by Johannes Gutenberg around 1440. The silent return was silent no longer. The press gave the rediscovered knowledge wings. Ideas that had once taken a lifetime to copy by hand could now be disseminated across the continent in weeks. The works of the ancients and the new commentaries upon them spread like wildfire, creating an international republic of letters. It empowered figures like Copernicus, who, sitting in a cathedral in Poland, could access the astronomical theories preserved in Arabic texts and dare to resurrect the heliocentric model of Aristarchus of Samos, an idea that had been born in Alexandria 2 millennia prior. The spark had traveled an unimaginable distance, from the shores of the Mediterranean to the deserts of the East, nurtured in the academies of the Islamic world, carried back through Spain and Sicily, and finally, with the help of a German inventor, it ignited the fire that would create the modern world. The circle was complete. The library had returned home. As we conclude this part of our journey into the fate of the Great Library, we'd like to extend a special thank you for listening. If you're finding comfort in these explorations, please consider liking this video and subscribing to Slumber Expeditions. We would also love to hear from you in the comments below. Tell us where you're listening from and what time it is there. It's always fascinating to connect with our global community of curious minds. You can also share which part of the story has captivated you the most so far. It would be wonderful to start a conversation around it. Now, let the mystery of what we've uncovered so far settle in your mind as we prepare to continue our exploration into the profound implications of this saved knowledge. Let us now step fully into the realm of contemplation, to imagine the world as it might be, a world where the great river of Alexandrian knowledge flowed uninterrupted from antiquity into the medieval period and beyond. The theory of the library's salvation is not merely an intriguing historical what-if. It is a lens that refracts the entire timeline of human progress into a new and startling pattern. If the core of classical learning was preserved and strategically reintroduced, then the trajectory of our history, the Dark Ages, the Renaissance, the Scientific Revolution, was not a natural cycle of loss and recovery, but a carefully managed process of revelation. The implications cascade through every facet of our modern existence, suggesting a world that would be both recognizably our own and profoundly, fundamentally different. Consider first the field of medicine, a discipline where the loss of Alexandrian knowledge had the most immediate and tragic consequences. In our known history, the works of Galen and Hippocrates were preserved in fragmented, often corrupted forms. European medicine stagnated for nearly a millennium, relying on a flawed understanding of anatomy derived from animal dissection and a theory of humors that often did more harm than good. But what if the full Alexandrian medical corpus had been continuously available? The physicians of the Malsaion, Herophilus and Erasistratus, had practiced human dissection, laying the foundations of neurology and cardiology. They understood the brain as the seat of intelligence and the heart as a pump. This knowledge, if it had been a living tradition rather than a lost one rediscovered 1,000 years later, could have transformed the world. The horrors of the Black Death in the 14th century might have been mitigated by a better understanding of contagion and public health. Surgical techniques would have advanced by centuries. The very concept of a hospital, which the Islamic world developed from Hellenistic models, would have taken root in Europe much earlier. Imagine the cumulative effect on human lifespan and suffering if this thread had not been severed. The dark period of medical ignorance was not an inevitable historical phase. It may have been a direct result of a knowledge gap that the guardians of Alexandria sought to bridge. In the realm of astronomy and physics, the potential leap is even more staggering, touching on our very conception of humanity's place in the cosmos. Aristarchus of Samos's heliocentric model, proposed in the 3rd century BCE, was a revolutionary idea that waited nearly 1,800 years for Nicholas Copernicus to independently resurrect. In the interim, the complex, Earth-centered Ptolemaic model held sway, its system of epicycles becoming increasingly convoluted to explain planetary motion. If Aristarchus's work, along with the advanced mathematical astronomy of Hipparchus, had been part of an unbroken scholarly conversation, the Copernican revolution might have occurred not in the 16th century, but perhaps in the late Roman Empire or the early Islamic Golden Age. This earlier shift would have had cascading effects. With his sun-centered model accepted earlier, Johannes Kepler's laws of planetary motion and Isaac Newton's theory of universal gravitation could have been developed centuries sooner. The human conception of our cosmic significance would have been transformed a millennium earlier, potentially altering the course of theology, philosophy, and our exploratory drive. The age of exploration might have been guided by more precise celestial navigation, leading to different discoveries and encounters. The technological and industrial landscape of this alternate world would be nearly unrecognizable. The Antikythera mechanism, an ancient Greek analog computer found in a shipwreck, proves that the Hellenistic world possessed a sophistication in precision gearwork and mechanical engineering that would not be seen again until the 14th century. Furthermore, within the library would have been the works of engineers like Ctesibius and Hero of Alexandria, who described inventions powered by steam, compressed air, and water. In our history, these were treated as novelties, toys for temples. But with the full weight of Alexandrian engineering and mathematical knowledge preserved and built upon by successive generations, these ideas could have been recognized for their revolutionary potential. The principles of steam power, automation, and even early computing might have been developed not in the 18th and 19th centuries, but during the height of the Islamic Golden Age or the European Middle Ages. The course of economic history, global trade, and environmental change would have been dramatically altered. The Industrial Revolution, when it came, would have been a gradual evolution from a much higher baseline, rather than a sudden explosion. This continuity of knowledge would have also reshaped the map of the world in profound ways. With more advanced astronomy, mathematics, and shipbuilding techniques continuously refined over the centuries, navigation would have been far more precise. The Great Age of Exploration, driven in part by Europeans seeking new routes to the east after the fall of Constantinople, might have been preceded by earlier, more confident voyages. The cultures of the Americas, for instance, might have been encountered in a different era, under potentially different circumstances, by a world better equipped with technology and, perhaps, a more enlightened perspective born from a longer, more continuous dialogue with diverse cultures. The entire geopolitical balance of the planet, the distribution of power and influence, would have unfolded along a completely different axis, potentially leading to a world with less stark divisions between East and West, as the intellectual heritage of both would have been seen as a shared, continuous stream from a common source. The ripple effects extend beyond the tangible into the very psyche of Western culture. Our relationship with the past would be fundamentally different. The narrative of a dark age, separating the glory of antiquity from the modern world, would not exist. We would not speak of a renaissance or a rebirth, but of periods of acceleration or synthesis. The trauma of loss, the sense of a fallen world that had to claw its way back to a forgotten light, is a deep-seated theme in our art, literature, and philosophy. If the library never burned, that cultural psyche would be founded not on loss and redemption, but on continuity and perpetual growth. The world we inhabit in this speculative vision would not just be more technologically advanced, it would be philosophically and psychologically fundamentally altered, shaped by an unbroken thread of inquiry that stretched back in an unbroken line to the very shores of Alexandria. Beyond the historical and technological implications, the legend of the Library of Alexandria, whether saved or lost, holds a powerful, enduring grip on the human imagination. It has transcended its historical reality to become a potent metaphor, a symbol of our deepest yearnings and fears about knowledge itself. The idea of a shadow library, a complete archive of all that is known, existing just beyond our reach, resonates with a profound psychological truth. It speaks to our intuition that wisdom is not entirely ours, that some essential part of it remains hidden, waiting to be found. This chapter explores the library not merely as a physical place, but as a powerful archetype dwelling in the collective unconscious, shaping our stories and our understanding of our own minds. The concept of a universal library is an ancient and recurring one across human cultures. It appears in the esoteric myth of the Akashic records in Theosophical tradition, a mystical compendium said to encode every human event, thought, word, and emotion in a non-physical plane of existence, a kind of cosmic memory. This idea finds a chillingly beautiful literary expression in Jorge Luis Borges's famous short story, The Library of Babel, which describes a universe composed of an infinite number of hexagonal galleries containing every possible book. Borges's library is both a paradise and a nightmare. It contains all truth, but also every possible falsehood, and the sheer, crushing infinitude of it renders the search for meaning almost futile. The Library of Alexandria represents a finite, human-scale version of this terrifying and wonderful idea, the attainable dream of total knowledge, which makes its historical loss, or its tantalizing hidden nature, all the more poignant. This archetype serves a crucial psychological function. The lost library symbolizes the fragmented nature of our own understanding and memory. Each of us carries within us a personal library of experiences, learned facts, and half-remembered moments, but it is inherently incomplete. We have forgotten vast swathes of our childhood. We have failed to learn languages and skills. We grapple with ignorance on a million subjects. The Great Lost Library externalizes this internal feeling of incompleteness. Its destruction is a myth that gives form to our own anxiety about the limits of our minds and the fragility of memory. We mourn the Library of Alexandria because, on some level, we are mourning the vastness of what we, as individuals and as a species, do not know and have forgotten. It is a collective expression of the fear of forgetting, of the essential pieces of ourselves and our history that slip through the cracks of time. Conversely, the theory of the saved library taps into an equally powerful and hopeful archetype, the myth of the hidden treasure or the secret wisdom kept by a select few. This is a theme found in countless fairy tales, from the hidden hordes of dragons to the quest for the Holy Grail. The saved library becomes the ultimate treasure, not of gold, but of meaning. It represents the hope that our struggles for understanding are not in vain, that truth is not random or ephemeral, but is being safeguarded by benevolent guardians. It is the promise that enlightenment is not something we must invent from nothing, but something we can rediscover, a legacy waiting for us to become worthy of it. This narrative is fundamentally optimistic. It suggests a hidden order in the chaos of history, a secret continuity that assures us that the light of consciousness is being quietly tended through the dark nights of the world. In our modern digital age, this ancient archetype has found a new and powerful expression: the Internet. The World Wide Web is, in a very real sense, a contemporary attempt to build a new Library of Alexandria, a global, instantly accessible repository of all human knowledge. We are engaged in a colossal, ongoing project of digitization and storage, trying to create a permanent, universal backup for our civilization. And yet, this new library is already exhibiting the same vulnerabilities and paradoxes as the old one. It is subject to digital fires, data corruption, cyber attacks, link rot, and the ephemeral nature of digital storage formats. It contains both profound wisdom and bottomless falsehood, echoing Borges's vision of a library containing every possible truth and lie. It raises the same ancient questions. Who controls this knowledge? How is it curated? What is worth preserving? What do we do when faced with informational infinity? The story of Alexandria is, therefore, not a relic of the past, but a cautionary tale and a guiding myth for our own time, reminding us that the challenges of preservation, curation, and access are eternal. The enduring power of the library, then, lies in its profound duality. It is both a historical mystery and a timeless symbol. It represents the pinnacle of human achievement and the terrifying ease with which that achievement can be undone. It embodies our fear of ignorance and our hope for redemption. It is a cautionary tale about the fragility of civilization and a hopeful legend about the resilience of ideas. Whether its scrolls turned to ash or were carried to safety, the Library of Alexandria continues to live on as a powerful idea. It challenges us to value knowledge, to protect it not just from fire and sword, but from neglect, dogma, and the simple passage of time. It reminds us that every book we read, every idea we share, is a thread in the great, unending tapestry of understanding, a tapestry that we are all, in our own small way, helping to weave and preserve against the encroaching dark. As our expedition draws to a close, we arrive at a final, calming contemplation. The frantic question with which we began, what if the library never burned, slowly transforms, like a complex equation resolving into an elegant solution, into a more profound and serene realization. Perhaps the physical fate of the scrolls in the Brucaean quarter of Alexandria is, in the grandest scheme, secondary. The true library, the essential core of its being, was never confined to a building of stone and cedar wood. It was and is an unbroken thread of human curiosity, a living tradition of inquiry that has been passed from hand to hand, from culture to culture, across the centuries and the continents. The fire, whether it happened or not, could not sever this thread. It could only make it temporarily harder for us to see its brilliant, continuous glow. Think of the long, unbroken chain of minds that have carried this thread. Picture the scholars of the Mouse-Ion, their thoughts illuminated by the works of their predecessors, adding their own insights to the great conversation. See the anonymous monk in a sun-baked desert monastery, patiently copying a geometry text by the flickering light of an oil lamp, his hand ensuring the survival of an idea. Imagine the translator in Toledo, sweat beading on his forehead as he carefully finds the Latin equivalent for an Arabic term that itself was a translation of a Greek idea, building a bridge of words across a millennium. Visualize the Renaissance artist studying Vitruvius to understand the proportions of a human body, or the astronomer in Padua peering through a telescope and seeing the heavens through the conceptual framework first built by Aristarchus. Each of these individuals, known and unknown, was a vessel for the library's spirit. They were living libraries, carrying forward the flame of a question asked long ago on the shores of the Mediterranean. This continuity is not a linear, simple path of progress, but a great, meandering river, a delta of human thought. It has periods of rapid, turbulent flow and periods where it seems to run underground, moving silently through hidden aquifers of monasteries and private collections before bursting forth again into the light in a new place with renewed force. The Islamic Golden Age was one such powerful resurgence, a broadening of the river. The European Renaissance was another. In our own time, we are witnessing another explosive expansion of this river into the digital realm. The thread connects Eratosthenes, calculating the Earth's size with sticks and shadows on an Egyptian beach, to the satellites that now map our planet in exquisite detail. It connects the intricate gears of the Antikythera mechanism to the silicon chips in the device you may be using to listen to this very story. The medium has changed from papyrus to parchment to printed codex to digital screen, but the conversation, the essential human drive to understand, to map, to know, continues without interruption. The true, enduring lesson of the Library of Alexandria, therefore, may not be about the importance of preserving objects, but about the importance of preserving the conditions for wonder. The Great Library was a monument to a specific, powerful idea, that the universe is knowable, that through careful observation, relentless reason, and open dialogue, humanity can comprehend the laws that govern existence, from the motion of the stars to the workings of the human heart. This idea is the real treasure that the Guardians sought to protect. It is this idea that was saved by every scholar who copied a text, every translator who bridged a language gap, every teacher who inspired a student. They were not just saving words, they were saving a worldview, a commitment to the light of reason as the best tool for navigating our existence. And so, as you lie in the quiet of your room, the story of the library can settle into a deeply personal space. Each of us is a link in this ancient and glorious chain. Every time we seek to understand something new, every time we question a comfortable assumption, every time we share a piece of knowledge with a child or a friend, we are acting as a guardian of that ancient flame. We are adding a scroll, however small, to the infinite library of human understanding. The fear of loss is natural, but it is balanced by the enduring, irrepressible power of curiosity. The scrolls may crumble, but the questions they asked are eternal. The buildings may fall, but the pursuit of truth is a foundation that cannot be shaken. The Great Library of Alexandria, in the end, never needed to be saved from fire, because it was never truly contained by walls of stone. It exists wherever a human mind looks up at the stars and wonders, wherever an experiment is conducted with an open heart, wherever a story is told that seeks to make sense of our world. It is the collective inheritance of our species, a story that began in the distant past and continues in this very moment with you, a curious listener, adding your quiet attention to the great, unending narrative. The light has not been extinguished. It has been passed, hand to hand, through the long night, and it burns still, here and now. We have reached the end of our slumber expedition for this evening. Thank you for joining us on this journey through time and thought. May the spirit of quiet inquiry and the comfort of continuity linger with you as you drift into rest.